Hey, Jay Carper here from American Torah. And today I'm reading in Proverbs chapter 10, verses 4 through 5. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. So there are three things that's being talked about there. The first is that, the diligent person is going to be more successful financially than the lazy person. Pretty straightforward. The second is not only the one who is diligent in hard work, but the one who plans ahead and is consistent, who gathers in summer. That person is going to be more successful over the long term. And the third thing is the shame that is caused by a son who fails to follow up and fails to be diligent. So let's talk about the first part. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. It's really almost self-evident that hard work and diligent work over the long haul is going to increase your chances of being wealthy. Now, we can define wealth however you want, whether that's finances or friendships or respect, whatever it is. Being lazy will make it much harder for you to acquire those things that you really want, whatever they are. Being diligent, working hard, whether you work hard on relationships or you work hard in business or at building your skills, those are the things that are going to gain you wealth, whether material, spiritual, relational, many different kinds of wealth. But being diligent and working hard is what gets you those things. Most people who are poor in the things that they really value are poor for a reason. They're poor because they were slack. They didn't work hard for what they wanted, and it's a harsh truth, and a lot of people will disagree with that, but it's just the way the universe works. It doesn't really matter whether you like it or not. The harder you work, the more diligent you work. It's not always the harder you work, but the more diligent you are, the more thoughtful you are, the more intent you are, the more you will gain from your labors. And that's, of course, not everyone who works hard or is diligent becomes wealthy. Yeshua is Yeshua is an exemplar of everything, and he wasn't rich. He, didn't have a home. He didn't have fancy clothes. He had the cloak that he wore and the sandals on his feet, and he trusted in the Father to provide for him. And other people are sick or have had disasters happen, like Job did for a time. Or they may be poor for some other reason. But those things are really the exception. There's no inherent virtue in either poverty or wealth. But overall, you will be wealthier if you work hard. And this is something to keep in mind about the Proverbs overall, is that Solomon wasn't giving you laws of the universe. He was talking about principles. If you work hard, you will tend to be wealthier. If you discipline your children will tend to live better and more honorable lives. It's not a guarantee. It's a principle and a tendency, the way that God set the universe up to work. So moving down to the next one. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. Wisdom not only works hard today, but plans ahead for the future. If you're going to be a farmer, you have to plan ahead. You have to start with preparing the soil. You burn it or weed it, whatever you need to do to remove the weeds. You till the soil, you break it up, you add nutrients, you select the right seeds for your climate. You plant them in the right method. Whether you're sowing, broadcast seeding, or you're sowing in rows, or you space them out or pair them up. Whatever you're doing, you need to plan ahead for the kind of plants you're growing for your climate, and you have to plant in the right time. You have to know what season it is. Then you have to plan ahead for the harvest. You have to know when will your crops be ready. And some crops make this obvious. The apples turn red, but potatoes are a little harder to tell when it's time to harvest them. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to plan ahead. And this brings us to the third point here. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. In part, this goes to the same principle that Yeshua talked about when you have to count the cost. If you're going to build a tower or if you're going to plant a field, you have to count the cost. You have to plan ahead and make sure that you have the resources and the personal wherewithal to carry it through. And if you plant your fields, if you water all through the summer, you do your pruning and weeding, what's the point if then you don't harvest at the right time or you let your crops rot in the field? But why does this foolish son who failed to harvest cause shame? It's not just shame on himself. I mean, that part is obvious. He also causes shame to his family and his father in particular. And it's not just because his father is embarrassed around his friends and, when his friends point and laugh at his son's field and says, "What kind of son did you raise?" That's very true, and that is a source of shame. But a son is also his father's name. Just as Yeshua came in the name of the Father, every son goes in his father's name out into the world. Every son carries his father's reputation. Some men will build institutions, some men will conquer countries or be kings, and they'll leave their mark in the world in that way. Most men, the only mark they will ever leave in the world that lasts well beyond their own lifetimes is their children, and their sons more than their daughters. Again, I don't really care if you like that or not. It's just the truth. So a son who fails to plan ahead, especially for the far future, brings shame on his father's memory, on his father's name. When the father is gone, when he's dead and buried, and the son is he's carrying on his father's name. And if he fails to follow in his father's footsteps or to improve on the things that his father left him, say his father planted and metaphorically planted and maintained the fields and did all the work in the summer and leaves the harvest for his son. And this is the case in many men's lives. The real fruition of their labors comes after they're gone. And if those who come later, and it doesn't have to even be his son, it could be as a metaphorical son, the heirs of his teaching or his philosophies, if they fail to follow up and take advantage of what they've been given, much like we've done in America today, we have abandoned the heritage of our fathers. We have thrown it all away and slept through the harvest. And we bring shame on our fathers. And this is true in the nuclear family and in the community, in the institutions, and in nations. We don't want to be those kinds of sons. So work hard, plan ahead, and don't sleep through your harvest. This is Jay Carper with American Torah. Be wise and be blessed.